Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. Carla Evans had always believed in building something solid. A marriage, a home, a future. For 25 years she stood beside her husband, Mark, through every challenge, every setback. She had been there when he was just a struggling businessman, helping him build his company from scratch, sacrificing her own dreams so that their dreams could take flight. They had a system. Carla handled the finances at home while Mark focused on growing their wealth. At work, they weren't just comfortable, they were thriving. A beautiful house in an upscale neighborhood, luxury vacations, a life that Carla had always dreamed of, until the other woman came along. Alyssa Monroe was young, blonde, and had a smile that could charm the devil himself. Carla had noticed her name on Mark's phone months before everything fell apart. She had ignored it at first, not wanting to be one of those wives. The paranoid, suspicious kind. Then came the sudden business trips, the missed anniversaries, the distracted, half-hearted conversations. And then, one evening, Mark came home and told her bluntly, "I'm leaving." Just like that. No warning, no apology. At first, Carla thought it was a midlife crisis, that he'd come to his senses. But when the divorce papers arrived, listing Alyssa's penthouse as his new residence, she realized the truth. Mark hadn't just met Alyssa. He had built a life with her while still stringing Carla along. The financial nightmare. What followed was a war. Carla, who had once lived in luxury, was now living paycheck to paycheck. Mark, who had promised that they'd always be secure, left her with almost nothing. The businesses, the investments, the real estate. It was all tied up in Mark's name. "You'll get what's fair," Mark had said, his voice smooth, patronizing. "Let's not make this ugly." Carla wanted to believe him, but then she saw the bank statements, their joint accounts, wiped out, the properties, quietly transferred to Mark's company. Now his alone. Mark had played the game well. He left her the house, but what good was a house if she couldn't afford the mortgage? He left her memories, while he ran off to enjoy his new life with Alyssa. Carla had been erased, but she wasn't going to let them win. The courtroom showdown. The courtroom was packed. Mark, confident as ever, sat beside Alyssa, who was practically glowing with satisfaction. Alyssa had made no attempt to hide her amusement. She whispered to Mark between giggles, her manicured nails tapping against his arm. She was so sure of herself, so convinced that she had won. Carla sat alone. No expensive lawyers, no legal team. Just her and the hope that maybe, just maybe, justice existed. The proceedings dragged on. Carla's lawyer, a determined but overworked attorney named James Harding, argued that Mark had deliberately moved assets to avoid splitting them in the divorce. Mark's attorney, a man in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Carla's monthly expenses, laughed it off. "Mr. Evans was simply making wise financial decisions," he said smoothly. Carla clenched her fists under the table. Alyssa let out a loud, exaggerated sigh, clearly enjoying the show. When the judge called for a break, Carla stood to leave the courtroom for some air, but as she passed Mark and Alyssa, she caught Alyssa's smirk. "Sorry, darling," Alyssa whispered, just loud enough for Carla to hear. "Maybe next time, don't let yourself go." Laughter. Mark chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. Alyssa's giggle rang in Carla's ears. It was like a knife to the chest. And then, just as Carla was about to walk away, Alyssa leaned in closer and said with a smirk, "Oh, and in case you're wondering, he was cheating for years. Not just with me." Carla felt her body freeze. But she didn't say a word. She simply walked away. Because what Alyssa didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that Carla had one last move to make. And it was about to change everything. The will that changed everything. 3 weeks before the trial, Carla had received an unexpected phone call. "Mrs. Evans, I need to speak with you about something urgent." The voice on the other end belonged to a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, her father-in-law's lawyer. Mark's father, Henry Evans, had passed away a few months prior. A man of strict values and deep respect for family. Carla had assumed that, like everything else, the inheritance had gone straight to Mark. She was wrong. Henry Evans had known about his son's infidelities, and he had disapproved. So, in his final act, Henry did something that no one, not even Mark, had anticipated. He rewrote his will. Not to leave his fortune to his son, but to his daughter-in-law. The moment of truth. Back in the courtroom, Carla's heart pounded as she listened to Mark's lawyer drone on about how she was entitled to nothing. The judge nodded slowly, then turned toward Carla's attorney. "Does the petitioner have anything further?" James Harding stood, his expression unreadable. "Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to introduce new evidence." There was a murmur in the courtroom as James approached the judge's bench and handed over a thick folder. Mark's confident smirk wavered. Alyssa arched a perfect eyebrow. The judge flipped through the documents, eyes scanning the lines carefully. A long pause followed. Then the judge cleared his throat. "I believe we need a recess." Mark frowned. "What's going on?" Alyssa crossed her arms, clearly annoyed. But Carla just sat there calm. 'Cause she knew. This was the beginning of the end for Mark and Alyssa. When the judge returned from recess, the courtroom was silent with anticipation. Mark, who had been lounging confidently just minutes before, now sat upright, a frown beginning to creep onto his face. Alyssa, still wearing that smug little smirk, leaned toward him and whispered, "Relax. What could she possibly have?" The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Evans, I have reviewed the new evidence presented by the petitioner, and I must say, I find this development compelling." Mark's lawyer straightened in his seat. "Your Honor, if I may." "You may not," the judge cut in, his voice firm. "This court takes fraudulent asset transfers very seriously." Carla stole a glance at Mark. For the first time he wasn't smirking. His fingers drummed against the table, his jaw tightening. He was starting to sweat. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "it has come to my attention that the estate of the late Henry Evans, your father, has made a significant determination in regard to inheritance." Alyssa chuckled under her breath. "Oh, please." He turned to Mark. His dad hated her. No way he left her anything. But then, as if in direct response to Alyssa's arrogance, the judge lifted a document and read aloud. "I, Henry Evans, being of sound mind, hereby declare that due to my son Mark's infidelities, betrayal, and lack of moral character, I do not leave my estate to him. Instead, I bequeath my entire fortune to my daughter-in-law, Carla Evans, as a reward for her loyalty, dignity, and unwavering strength in the face of my son's indiscretions." The courtroom was silent. Carla kept her expression blank, though her heart hammered inside her chest. Mark, on the other hand, looked like someone had just smacked him in the face with a brick. "What?" Alyssa shrieked, jumping to her feet. Mark's lawyer scrambled through his notes. "Your Honor, this must be a mistake." "There is no mistake," the judge said, tapping the papers in front of him. "These documents are legally binding, signed and notarized. The estate, which includes 3 properties, multiple investment portfolios, and a trust valued at $75 million, now belongs to Mrs. Carla Evans." Mark's mouth fell open. "Alyssa." She laughed. But this time, it wasn't the confident, arrogant laugh she'd been flaunting all day. It was a hysterical laugh. The kind of laugh that comes when you realize you just lost everything. "No. No, no, no," Mark muttered, shaking his head. "This has to be a joke." "It's not a joke," Carla said, finally speaking. Her voice was calm, controlled. She turned to face him, locking eyes with the man who had betrayed her. "Your father was a good man. And he knew exactly what you were." Mark's face turned red. "You..." he started, but the judge cut him off. "I would highly advise you to remain silent, Mr. Evans, before you further incriminate yourself." Carla could see it now, Mark's panic. The realization that he wasn't the winner anymore. And then Alyssa, clearly unable to process what had just happened, turned on Mark. "You told me you had money, that we were going to be set for life," she screeched, her carefully applied makeup cracking as her face twisted with rage. "What the hell is this?" Mark turned to his lawyer. "Fix this." But his lawyer sighed, rubbing his temples. "You don't fix a legal will, Mark. Your father disinherited you. This case is over." Alyssa still didn't get it. She turned to Carla, her eyes blazing. "You planned this, didn't you?" she spat. "You knew all along." Carla tilted her head, considering her words. Had she known about the will before today? Well, had she hoped for justice? Yes. And now, as she watched Alyssa's world crumble, she allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. "Maybe next time," Carla said softly, leaning in just enough for Alyssa to hear. "Don't laugh too soon." Alyssa lunged. Security moved instantly, pulling her back before she could reach Carla. "You gold-digging hag!" Alyssa shrieked. "You think you won? You're still alone. No man wants you. You'll die miserable." Carla didn't flinch. She simply smoothed out her jacket, picked up her bag and said, "That's the difference between you and me, Alyssa. I don't need a man to win." And with that, she walked out of the courtroom, head held high, while behind her, Mark and Alyssa's empire collapsed. Mark's final desperation. Outside the courthouse, Carla took a deep breath, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Freedom. The press was already outside, cameras flashing, reporters asking questions. But she ignored them. She had nothing left to say. "Carla, wait." He turned. Mark stood there, his confidence gone. His expensive suit meaningless now that he had nothing. He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know I messed up." Carla raised an eyebrow. "Messed up? I should have treated you better," he continued, his voice quiet now. "I was stupid, okay? But we built something real, Carla. You and me." She just stared at him. Had this been 2 years ago, maybe she would have listened. Maybe she would have wanted to believe that some part of Mark was still the man she had married. But that man was long gone. And she was finally free. Carla smiled. Then she said the words that had been burning inside her for months. "You made your choice, Mark. And I made mine." She turned to leave, but paused just long enough to throw one last dagger at him. "Oh, and one more thing." She met his eyes. "You might want to check Alyssa's bank account." Mark frowned. "What?" But by the time he turned around, Alyssa was already gone. She had taken everything he had left. And just like that, Mark was left with nothing. Not his money, not his father's fortune, and not even the woman he had given up everything for. Mark stood outside the courthouse, his entire world crumbling around him. The reality hit him like a freight train. Carla had everything. His father's fortune, the real estate, the investments, everything he had built while he thought he was outsmarting her. And Alyssa. His fingers trembled as he pulled out his phone. He tried calling her once. No answer. Straight to voicemail. Then, almost as if fate wanted to twist the knife deeper, he received a notification from his banking app. It was a withdrawal. A massive one. Alyssa had emptied his personal accounts. The ones he had kept separate from the business. The ones she wasn't supposed to have access to. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. She must have gotten his passwords months ago. He had been so distracted, so sure that he was in control, that he hadn't even noticed she was playing him. His knees nearly buckled. Alyssa hadn't just left him. She had cleaned him out. Carla, on the other hand, felt lighter than she had in years. She sat in the back of her lawyer's car, her phone buzzing with messages. Friends, acquaintances, even journalists wanted a statement. But she ignored them all. Her focus was on what came next. She had $75 million to her name now. A fortune she had never expected, but one she intended to use wisely. And her first move, taking back control. That night, she contacted a financial team and began restructuring her assets. Mark's former business partners. They were more than happy to work with her now. Turned out most of them never liked Mark anyway. The properties. She had no intention of living in that massive mansion alone. Instead, she sold it, at a premium, and moved into a luxurious but more manageable home. She wasn't looking for revenge. She was looking for a rebirth. But then, a few weeks later, fate delivered something even sweeter than revenge. Mark had nothing left. His bank accounts, wiped clean. His father's fortune. His company. Sinking ship. And to make matters worse, the IRS had launched an investigation into his financial history. Apparently, in his desperate attempt to hide money during the divorce, he had committed tax fraud. He was facing serious charges. Carla learned about this over coffee one morning. She read the headline with a smile, shaking her head. She never had to lift a finger. Mark had destroyed himself. Then, as if fate wanted to give her one last gift, she got a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. When she picked up, a familiar voice, tired, desperate, came through the line. Carla. It was Mark. She almost laughed. The same man who had left her for another woman. The same man who had emptied their accounts and tried to leave her with nothing. The same man who had mocked her in court. And now, he was begging. I know I don't deserve this, he started, his voice strained. But I need your help. Carla leaned back in her chair, sipping her coffee. Help! He took a shaky breath. I have nothing. Alyssa took everything. The IRS is after me. I don't even have a place to stay. She almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then she remembered the years of betrayal. The way he had laughed at her. The way Alyssa had mocked her in court. Carla took another sip of her coffee, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make him sweat. Then she said, with a voice as cold as steel, "That sounds like a you problem." And with that she hung up. She never heard from Mark again. 1 year later, Carla was thriving. She had invested in charities, traveled to places she had always dreamed of, and, most importantly, found happiness on her own terms. She never remarried. She never needed to. Because in the end, the greatest revenge wasn't money. It wasn't even watching Mark suffer. It was living well. And as Carla sat on a sun-soaked balcony, looking out over the ocean, she finally understood. She hadn't lost Mark. She had escaped him. And that was the greatest victory of all. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story and tell us where you're watching from.